A single dad scraped together his last dollars for a used laptop to keep his family afloat. What he found on it didn't just belong to a missing billionaire, it revealed a secret that would change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from the silence in Alex's third-floor apartment? Wasn't peaceful. It was heavy-weighted with the things he couldn't afford to fix or replace it. Hummed in the old refrigerator that ran too loud and settled in the faint flicker of the overhead light. He kept meaning to change outside a pale November sky. Pressed against the glass, a canvas of smudged gray that promised a cold night, he stood at the radiator sink, one hand gripping the chipped ceramic edge, the other holding a coffee mug that had been empty for 10 minutes. He was staring at the water spot on the bottom like it might hold the answer to a question. He was too tired to even form the faint sound of a cartoon jingle, drifted from the living room where his daughter Mia was curled on the worn floral couch, a fortress of pillows built around her. She was 8 years old, and her world was still measured in screen time, and snack schedules not in unpaid invoices, and the quiet dread of a bank account hovering just above zero. Alex's world was measured in exactly that. His laptop, the one he'd nursed for 6 years with cheap replacement parts and a place in total stubborn refusal to give up, had finally surrendered that morning. It didn't just die. It went with a quiet pop, a puff of something that smelled like burnt plastic and the definitive blackness of a screen that would never turn on again for a freelance graphic designer. That screen was his office, his lifeline, his only bridge to the clients who paid just enough to keep the lights on, and Mia in shoes that fit. He'd spent the last hour running the numbers in his head, a frantic, desperate calculation that always ended in the same place. He had $217 to his name, enough for groceries for the week, enough for the gas he needed to take Mia to her grandmother's on Saturday, but not enough for both, and certainly not enough for a new computer, a used one, maybe a cheap one, a gamble, but it was the only move he had left. Mia's laughter, a bright, sudden sound, cut through the heavy quiet. She was watching a cartoon about a magical cat that could solve any problem. With a flick of its tail, Alex forced a smile and turned from the sink, wiping his dry hands on his jeans. For a moment, he let himself believe in that kind of magic, the kind that didn't come with a price tag. He walked into the living room and sat on the floor beside the couch, leaning his head against the cushion. Mia didn't look away from the screen, but she reached out a small hand and placed it on his shoulder. Her fingers were sticky with something sweet, probably the remnants of her breakfast toast. "Hey, Dad," she said, her eyes still glued to the animated chaos. "You look sad." He managed a small chuckle, just thinking about work. "Honey, that's all," she nodded, as if this was a perfectly reasonable explanation. For the lines of worry etched around his eyes. He knew he couldn't hide it from her. Not really. Mia had a way of seeing things, a quiet perceptiveness that had been there since her mother passed 3 years ago. She saw the way he'd stretch a loaf to have bread an extra day, or how he'd wear a sweater inside to keep the heating bill down. She never mentioned it, but he felt her watching her. Quiet understanding, a constant source of both comfort and a deep, aching guilt. He was supposed to be her rock, her provider, the one who kept the world's sharp edges from ever touching her. But lately, those edges were all he could feel. He had to get a computer. He had to find a way, not just for him, but for her. For the quiet stability of, quote, their small world held together by love and routine, and the desperate hope that things would get better. He would make them better. He stood up and kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled like bubblegum shampoo, a scent so simple and innocent. It almost broke him, right there. "All right, kiddo," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm going to go run an errand. I'll be back in a bit." Mia finally looked at him, her brow furrowed in that serious way she had. "Can I come?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, okay. Grab your coat." Maybe we'll find some magic of our own. He didn't know what he was looking for, but as he held the door open for his daughter stepping out into the cold gray afternoon, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt all day. Determination. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a solution. But it was a start. And right now, a start was all he had. The city felt like a labyrinth of closed doors and price tags that mocked him from behind polished glass. Windows. Alex drove the old sedan with a quiet focus, his hands tight on the wheel, his gaze scanning every storefront, every sign, every possibility. He'd spent an hour online, scrolling through classifieds and marketplace listings, but it was a graveyard of broken screens and missing keys or machines that were priced just out of his reach. $100, too high. $50, too high. Even $20 felt like a canyon he couldn't cross. Mia sat beside him in the passenger seat, humming quietly to herself, her breath fogging the window. As she drew little smiley faces on the glass with her finger, she didn't complain about the endless driving or the way her dad's face seemed to tighten with every passing mile. She just existed in her own small pocket of peace, a hard, quiet counterpoint to the storm brewing inside him. He hated that he'd brought her along, that she was a witness to this slow, quiet hunt for a lifeline. He should have left her at home, where she could watch her cartoons and believe the world was a place where problems were solved in 22 minutes, but the thought of facing this alone had felt worse. The silence of the apartment would have been too loud, too accusing here, with her quiet humming and the warmth of her small presence beside him. He could almost pretend he was just a dad, running errands. On a Tuesday afternoon, he pulled over to the side of a busy street and rubbed his eyes. The city's noise pressed in on them. The shriek of a bus's air, brakes, the distant wail of a siren, the impatient honk of a car somewhere behind them. This was pointless. He was wasting gas. He didn't have chasing a solution that wasn't there. He was about to turn back to give up when Mia pointed toward a small side street tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up bakery. "What's that place, Dad?" Alex followed her finger and saw it. A small, unassuming storefront with a faded green awning. The sign above the door was hand-painted, the letters slightly uneven, Second Wind Electronics. It looked like a relic from another time, a place the rest of the city had forgotten. He'd never noticed it before. He'd driven down this main road 1,000 times but had never once looked down this quiet, forgotten artery of the city. Maybe he thought a place forgotten by the world might have prices to match. He took a slow breath, the first real breath he'd taken all day, and pulled the car into a turn. "All right, kiddo," he said, a flicker of hope stirring in his chest. "Let's see what's in there." Mia beamed, wiping the smiley faces from the window as if to get a better look. "Maybe they have a magic computer," she said, with the unshakable faith of an 8-year-old. Alex didn't answer. He just parked the car, turned off the engine, and let the silence settle for a beat. "Maybe they do," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Maybe they do." The bell above the door didn't chime. It gave a soft electronic chirp, a polite sound that felt out of place in a room that smelled of dust, old wiring, and the faint metallic tang of ozone. The shop was narrow and deep, the walls lined with shelves, crowded with a chaotic history of technology, tangled power cords sat in cardboard boxes next to stacks of monitors from a bygone era, bulky, beige, things that looked like museum pieces. A row of keyboards was arranged by size, their letters worn smooth by years of use. It wasn't a store, it was a sanctuary for forgotten things. A place where technology came not to be born but to be given one last chance at life. A woman stood behind a simple wooden counter at the back, her head bent over a circuit board, a magnifying lamp casting a pool of white light on her hands. She didn't look up right away. Her focus was absolute, her movements slow and deliberate. Alex and Mia stood just inside the door, letting their eyes adjust to the dim light. Mia's hand found her fingers curling around his own, As she took in the strange, quiet world of blinking lights and silent machines, finally the woman looked up. She pushed the magnifying lamp aside, and her face was cast in the soft, ambient glow of the shop. She was younger than Alex had expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back into a loose, messy bun. A few strands had escaped, framing a face that was strikingly beautiful, but in a quiet, understated way. She wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans. No name tag. No uniform, no practiced retail smile. Her eyes were the first thing Alex truly noticed. They were a deep, piercing blue, and they held a stillness, an observant calm that seemed to see more than just a customer looking for a deal. "Hello," she said. Her voice was soft, low, a little rough, as if she wasn't used to using it. "Much can I help you?" Alex cleared his throat, feeling suddenly self-conscious, like he'd stepped into a private workshop. Uninvited. "Yeah, I'm looking for a used laptop," he said, gesturing vaguely around the cluttered space. "Something reliable but cheap. My old one just gave up on me." The woman nodded slowly, her gaze drifting from Alex to Mia, then back again. She didn't ask about his budget. We didn't try to upsell him. She just turned and walked toward a shelf at the back of the store. Her movements were graceful, unhurried. Mia tugged on his hand and whispered, "She's pretty." Alex squeezed her hand gently, shushing her, but he couldn't disagree. The woman returned a moment later, holding a sleek, silver laptop. It looked newer than anything else in the store, impossibly thin and clean. "This one came in last week," she said, placing it on the counter. "It's a few years old, but the processor is solid. I ran diagnostics on it. This morning it's clean." Alex reached out and ran a hand over the cool metal surface. It felt like something from another world. It was faster, better, more powerful than anything he'd ever owned. "How much?" he asked, the word catching in his throat. She hesitated for just a second, her eyes flicking down to the scuffed toes of Mia's sneakers, then to the worn elbows of Alex's jacket. "200, she said finally. Alex's heart sank. It was a fair price, a great price even, but it was almost every dollar he had. He could do it, but it would mean an empty fridge and a week of instant noodles and the kind of quiet panic that kept him awake at night. He looked at Mia, who was staring at the laptop with wide, hopeful eyes. Then he looked back at the woman and nodded. "I'll take it." The cash felt like a confession as Alex counted it out onto the counter. $10 bills, $5 bills, worn and creased from being folded and refolded in his wallet. It was the physical manifestation of his struggle, laid bare under the fluorescent lights of a stranger's shop. He tried to keep his hands steady, tried to make the transaction feel normal, but he could feel the woman's eyes on him, not with pity, not with judgment, but with that same quiet, unnerving observation. He felt exposed, like she could see the frayed edges of his life, as clearly as she could see the frayed cuffs of his shirt. When the last bill was on the counter, he pushed the small stack toward her, his pride. A tight knot in his chest, Mia stood on her tiptoes, trying to see over the counter, her fingers gripping the wooden edge with excitement. She didn't see the silent exchange of dignity and desperation. She just saw the silver laptop that was about to become theirs. The woman behind the counter didn't scoop the money up right away. She let it sit there for a beat, a silent acknowledgement of what it represented. Then she carefully gathered the bills and placed them in an old metal cash box that looked as ancient as the rest of the shop. She pulled a power cord from a bin behind her and coiled it neatly, her movements still slow and deliberate. "It has a good battery," she said, her voice soft. "But it's always better to keep it plugged in when you're doing heavy design work." Alex blinked. "How did you know I was a designer?" He hadn't mentioned his work. She gave a faint smile, a ghost of one that barely touched her lips. "The faint smell of turpentine on your jacket, and a smudge of cyan ink on your thumb." She said it so matter-of-factly that it took him a second to process it. He glanced down at his hand, and sure enough, A tiny streak of blue ink was smeared near his knuckle, a remnant from a print job he'd finished last week. He looked back at her, a new wave of surprise washing over him. She wasn't just a shopkeeper, she was a detective of small details. He felt a strange mix of being seen and being completely transparent. It was unsettling, and for reasons he couldn't name, strangely comforting. She slid the laptop into a simple canvas sleeve and pushed it across the counter toward him. "There you go," she said. "If you have any issues with it, bring it back. I'll make it right." Alex nodded, tucking the laptop under his arm. The weight of it was both a relief and a burden. "Thanks," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "I appreciate it more than you know her." Eyes met his and held for a second, longer than was necessary for a simple transaction. "No problem," she said. "I'm glad it's going to a good home." As he and Mia stepped back out into the cold afternoon, the electronic chirp of the door sounding behind them. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left more than just his money on that counter. He felt like he'd left a piece of his story, and he had the strangest feeling she had picked it up. The apartment felt warmer when they returned, or maybe it was just the warmth of relief radiating from Alex's chest. He set the laptop on the small dining table with a reverence usually reserved for fragile antiques. The canvas sleeve was cool to the touch, and the weight of the machine felt solid, substantial, a promise of work to be done and bills to be paid. Mia hovered beside him, her hands clasped behind her back as she rocked back and forth on her heels. "Can we turn it on now? Please, please, please," Alex chuckled, pulling out a chair for her. All right. Let's see what this thing can do." He slid the laptop from its sleeve. The sleek silver casing gleamed under the apartment's dim light. It was a beautiful machine, a stark contrast to the chipped paint of the walls and the worn fabric of the chairs around it. He plugged in the power cord and pressed the power button. A soft chime filled the room, and the screen flickered to life. Bright and crisp and perfect. Mia gasped. A small sound of pure delight. "It's so fast," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Alex felt a smile spread across his face. A real one, this time unburdened by the weight of the last 24 hours. "Yeah, it is," he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. As he connected to their spotty Wi-Fi, he opened his email client, his design software, everything loaded in seconds, a task that used to take his old computer a full 5 minutes of groaning and whirring. This wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. It was a second chance. He spent the next hour working, setting up his files, and responding to a backlog of client emails. Mia sat beside him, drawing in her sketchbook, a comfortable silence settling between them, punctuated only by the soft click of his keyboard and the scratch of her crayons on paper. For the first time in weeks, Alex didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like he was treading water, and that was enough. The light outside had faded to a deep indigo, and the streetlights began to hum to life, casting a warm orange glow into the room. Mia had long since abandoned her sketchbook and was now curled up on the couch watching a movie, her eyelids growing heavy. Alex was still at the table, a half-empty cup of coffee beside him, lost in the rhythm of his work. He was finishing a logo revision for a client, a simple job that paid just enough to cover their internet bill, when he noticed a single folder on the desktop that he hadn't put there. Its name was simple, stark. Just the word drafts. He frowned. The woman at the shop had said the hard drive was clean. Had she missed this one? He hesitated for a moment, his cursor hovering over the icon. It wasn't his business. It was the previous owner's private files, a remnant of a life he had no right to look into. He should delete it, move it to the trash, and forget he'd ever seen it. But curiosity, a small, persistent nudge, wouldn't let him go. He double-clicked the folder, opened, revealing a small collection of text documents. Their titles were cryptic: Letter to R, The Bridge Plan, Musings on a Tuesday, and one simply named Journal. His conscience screamed at him to close the window to walk away. But his fingers moved on their own, as if guided by a force outside his control. He clicked on the journal file. It was password protected. A small lock icon appearing on the screen, Alex let out a breath. A strange mix of relief and disappointment. He shouldn't have tried anyway. It was an invasion of privacy, a line he knew he shouldn't cross. He was about to close the window when he noticed the password hint written in small gray letters beneath the entry field. The name of the dog you never had. He paused. What kind of password hint was that? It was poetic, strange, personal. He thought for a moment, trying to imagine the kind of person who would choose such a clue on a whim. He typed a single word. Hope. The screen blinked. Access denied. He tried another one. Shadow access denied. He was about to give up when a name floated into his mind, a simple classic name, the kind a lonely kid might give an imaginary friend. He typed it slowly. Max, and hit enter. The file opened. The quiet hum of the laptop's fan was the only sound in the room. As Alex stared at the screen, a wave of something cold and sharp washed over him, a feeling of trespass, of seeing something he was never meant to see. The journal wasn't a diary of daily events, it was a collection of fragmented thoughts, raw and unfiltered. A window into a soul he didn't know, but suddenly felt he understood. The first entry was dated. 3 months ago, it read, "They tell me success is a ladder, but they don't tell you how quiet it is at the top. They don't tell you that the air is so thin you can't breathe." Alex leaned forward, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He scrolled down, reading another entry. "I've built an empire of things I can touch, but I can't remember the last time someone touched my hand without wanting something in return. I sign checks for millions, but I can't buy a single hour of real conversation." The words were elegant, yet gut-wrenchingly honest. They spoke of a profound loneliness, a disillusionment, with a world of power and wealth that felt hollow and false. This wasn't just a laptop he had bought. That was a person's soul, laid bare in black and white text, and it was now sitting on his dining room table. He quickly closed the file, his hands trembling slightly. He felt a deep sense of shame for what he'd done, but also an overwhelming wave of empathy for the anonymous author. He looked over at Mia, sleeping soundly on the couch, her small face peaceful and untroubled. He had so little in comparison to the person who had written those words. But in that moment he felt like the richest man in the world. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep this. He couldn't pretend. He hadn't seen it. He had to take it back. He had to find the woman from the shop and return the piece of her life she had accidentally left behind. The thought of walking back into that shop filled Alex with a quiet dread. It wasn't just the awkwardness of admitting he'd snooped through a stranger's private files. It was the thought of facing her again, the woman with the observant eyes and the quiet calm that seemed to see right through him. What would he even say? "Hi, I bought this laptop and accidentally read your soul. Sorry about that." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small living room while Mia slept. The city lights painted shifting patterns on the walls. The journal entries echoed in his mind. They weren't just words on a screen. They were a confession, a cry for help from someone drowning in a sea of success. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, a pull, to do something more than just return the machine. He felt a need to return a piece of her own humanity that she thought she'd lost. The next morning, he woke before sunrise. The decision settled in his chest like a stone. He made Mia pancakes, her favorite, and tried to act as if it were just a normal Wednesday. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation he was about to have 100 different ways. After he dropped Mia off at school, he drove straight to the shop. The faded green awning looked the same, the hand-painted sign just as crooked. But today it felt different. It felt like a destination, a place where two very different worlds were about to collide. He took a deep breath, the canvas sleeve of the laptop tucked under his arm, and pushed the door open. The electronic chirp sounded louder. This time she was there behind the counter, just like before, a pair of delicate silver tools laid out on a black mat in front of her. She looked up as he entered, and a flicker of surprise crossed her face, a genuine, unguarded reaction that made his heart beat a little faster. "Back so soon?" she asked, her voice calm, but her eyes curious. "Did it die on you already?" No, it works great," he said, stepping forward and placing the laptop on the counter. "It works too great. Actually," he paused, trying to find the right words, "I found something on the desktop, a folder. You must have missed when you wiped it." Her expression didn't change, but he saw her hands still for a moment on the counter. A quiet tightening of her fingers. "A folder," she repeated, her voice neutral. He nodded. "I didn't mean to open it, but I did. I'm sorry, it was an invasion of your privacy." He looked at her then, really looked, trying to convey the sincerity of his apology. "I didn't read much, just a few lines, but I knew I couldn't keep it not. After that, I just wanted to bring it back to you." She stared at him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. Then she gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you," she said, and the words were quiet, but they carried a weight that filled the entire shop. "I appreciate you bringing it back." Alex let out a breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding. "That's it," he said. "Just thank you." He didn't know what he'd expected, maybe denial, maybe anger, maybe a quick dismissal. But her simple, quiet gratitude was almost more disarming. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He'd done the right thing. Now he should just leave. But he didn't want to. He wanted to. No more. About the woman who wrote about the loneliness of the sky. From the top of a ladder, he wanted to know the story behind the sad, poetic words that had kept him up all night. The air in the shop was thick with unspoken things, the hum of old electronics, and the faint scent of rain from the street outside. Alex stood at the counter, on the laptop, a silent witness between them. He had done what he came to do, but his feet felt rooted to the floor. He couldn't shake the feeling that just walking away would be a mistake, a missed opportunity for a conversation that mattered. "You know," he started, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "For what it's worth, whoever wrote that stuff, they sound like they're going through a lot." The woman, he still didn't know her name, didn't flinch. She simply looked down at the laptop, her fingers tracing the silver edge of the casing. "It's just writing," she said. "Softly, thoughts on a page, nothing more." Alex shook his head. "I don't think so." "It felt real," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "It felt like someone who needed to be reminded that not everyone wants something from you." A flicker of something vulnerable crossed her face just for a second, before the mask of calm settled back into place. "You're very perceptive," she said, her tone still even, but with a new edge of curiosity. "Most people wouldn't have brought it back. They would have wiped it and moved on." Alex shrugged. "I'm not most people then. I guess I'm lucky." She finally met his eyes, and for the first time he saw something other than quiet observation in them. He saw a hint of weariness, a deep-seated sadness that, the journal, had only hinted at it, made him want to stay, to talk, to break through the polite barrier she had so carefully constructed around herself. "There's a coffee shop at the end of the block," he said, the words surprising him as much as they, probably, surprised her. "I was heading there anyway. Would you want to join me?" Her eyes widened, slightly caught off guard by the invitation. She hesitated for a long moment, a silent battle playing out behind her gaze. He was sure she would say no, that she would retreat back into the safety of her quiet, dusty shop. But then, to his complete surprise, she gave a small, almost reluctant nod. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd like that," as she locked the shop door behind them, and they stepped out into the damp city air. Alex felt a strange sense of stepping into a new chapter. One he hadn't written and couldn't predict. He had come to return a stranger's secrets, but he was starting to feel like he was about to discover his own. Evelyn watched him from across the small table in the coffee shop. He held his mug with both hands, like he was trying to absorb its warmth. His knuckles were slightly calloused, and there was a faint scar running along his thumb, a testament to a life lived with tools and hard work, not keyboards and boardrooms. He hadn't asked for her name, and she hadn't offered it. For now she was just the woman from the shop, and he was the man who had read her end journal and hadn't run away. He had a daughter. He'd mentioned her briefly, Mia, a sweet name for a girl, who he clearly adored. His entire world seemed to revolve around her, and Evelyn felt a pang of something she couldn't name, not envy exactly, but a deep longing for that kind of simple, pure-hearted purpose. She'd spent the last few months trying to dismantle the life she'd built, or rather, the life that had been built for her. She'd sold her penthouse, her collection of modern art, even the car her father had given her. For her 30th birthday, she'd kept only the things that mattered. A handful of books, a box of old family photos, and the laptop. The laptop had been her last confession box, a place to pour out all the feelings she couldn't voice in her world of polite smiles and ruthless acquisitions. She thought she'd wiped it clean, but in her haste to shed her old skin, she'd made a mistake that had led her here sitting, across from a man with kind eyes and a tired smile. A man who saw her not as a headline or a number, but as a person who sounded like she was going through a lot. He didn't know how right he was. She hadn't just walked away from a company, she'd walked away from a legacy, from the crushing weight of being Evelyn Reed, the tech prodigy, the billionaire heiress, the woman who had everything and felt nothing. She'd come to this quiet neighborhood, this dusty little shop, to disappear, to become anonymous. But, in the eyes of this stranger, she felt more seen than she had in years, and it was both terrifying and intoxicating. He was talking now, telling her about a funny thing Mia had said that morning, and she found herself smiling, a real smile. Not the one she used for press conferences. She took a sip of her coffee and listened, letting his voice wash over her, a quiet, steady sound in the noisy world. She'd been trying so hard to escape for the first time in a long time. She didn't to feel like she was hiding. She felt like she was being found. The coffee shop was warm and filled with the low hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. It was a world away from the silent, dust-filled quiet of her shop. Alex sat across from her, a small puddle of water forming on the table from the condensation on his glass. He hadn't touched his coffee yet. His eyes were fixed on her with a gentle curiosity that felt both comforting and intense. "You never told me your name," he said. "Finally, Eve," she replied without hesitation. It was the name she'd given herself when she started this new life. A simple name, a fresh start. It felt more real to her now than the one on her birth certificate. Eve. He repeated, tasting the word, like it was something new. "Well, Eve, it was brave of you to write those things. Brave or foolish," she countered with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I'm still not sure which." Alex shook his head. "No, it was brave," he said, his voice firm. "It takes courage to admit you're not okay, especially in a world that demands you to be perfect." She looked down at her hands, her fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic of her mug. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he admitted, "but it's honest. And honesty is rare." That word hung in the air between them. Honest. It was the one thing she had been chasing, the one thing her old life had lacked so completely. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching the people outside hurry past. "In the cold rain, you have a good heart, Alex," she said quietly. "You didn't have to come back. You could have just kept the laptop. No one would have known." He met her eyes. "I would have known, and I think you would have too." A slow smile spread across her face. A real one this time, one that reached her eyes and made them shine. "Yeah," she whispered. "You're probably Right in that moment, the space between them shifted. It was no longer just a shopkeeper and a customer. It was two people who had stumbled upon a shared truth in the most unexpected of ways. Two people who recognized the same quiet ache in each other's souls. He didn't know she was a billionaire. She didn't know he was one paycheck away from disaster. But none of that mattered right now. In the warmth of the small coffee shop, they were just two people finding a reason to stay back at a little longer. The journal entry was short, dated just a week before she'd sold the laptop. It read, "I stood on the balcony of my penthouse last night and watched the city lights blink below me. Millions of little lives, all moving and striving and connecting. And I have never felt so completely and utterly alone. I have a team of assistants to manage my schedule, a chef to cook my meals, and a driver to take me wherever I want to go, but I don't have a single person I could call at 2 a.m. just to hear a friendly voice. I am the architect of a world-class prison, and I am its only inmate." Alex closed the file, his chest tight. He shouldn't be reading this. He knew it was wrong, a violation of the trust she had tentatively offered him in the coffee shop, but he couldn't help himself. He had come home, and the words from the journal were a siren call, a mystery he felt compelled to understand. He wasn't just being nosy, he was trying to understand the woman behind the quiet eyes, the woman who noticed the ink on his thumb and the sadness in his posture. He wanted to understand how someone who seemingly had everything could feel so much like him who had nothing. The more he read, the more he saw the parallels. Her loneliness echoed his own. His was born of grief and financial struggle. Hers was born of wealth and isolation. But it was the same ache, the same feeling of being on the outside, looking in at a world of connection that felt just out of reach. He looked around his small apartment, the worn couch where he and Mia watched movies, the dining table that doubled as his office, the crayon drawings taped to the fridge. It wasn't much, but it was real. It was filled with a love that the woman in the journal was desperately searching for. He felt a sudden surge of protectiveness over her. This stranger he barely knew, he wanted to tell her that she wasn't alone, that real connection wasn't something you bought, but something you built, one small, honest moment at a time. He thought about her in that dusty shop, surrounded by broken things, finding solace in fixing what was discarded, and it suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just repairing old electronics. She was trying to repair herself. He closed the laptop and stood up, walking to the window to look out at the sleeping city. He didn't know what he was going to do next, but he knew he couldn't just let this go. This wasn't just about a laptop anymore. It was about a person, and for the first time in a long time, Alex felt a pull to fix something that had nothing to do with a circuit board. The next day, Alex found himself walking back toward the shop. He told himself it was to return the laptop for good, to tell her he had deleted the files and that her secret was safe. But he knew that was only half the truth. The other half was that he just wanted to see her again. He wanted to see if the warmth he'd felt in the coffee shop was real, or just a fleeting moment of shared vulnerability. When he pushed the door open, the electronic chirp seemed to welcome him. Eve was at her workbench, a pair of headphones on her head, humming softly to a song he couldn't hear. She looked up as he entered, and a small smile touched her lips, the kind that made him feel like he wasn't an interruption. "He's here again," she said, pulling off her headphones. "I was wondering if you'd come back." Alex held up the laptop. "I figured you'd want this back for real this time," he said, placing it on the counter. "I deleted the files. I won't look again. I promise." She held his gaze, her blue eyes soft and searching. "I believe you," she said, "but you don't have to return it. I meant what I said. It's yours." Just then, a small whirlwind of energy burst through the door. Mia, her pink coat unzipped and her backpack bouncing behind her. "Daddy, I forgot my lunchbox." She stopped short when she saw Eve, her eyes widening with curiosity. "Hello," she said, walking right up to the counter. Eve's smile widened, turning into something genuine and bright. "Well, hello to you too," Mia looked her up and down with the unfiltered appraisal of a child. "Are you my dad's friend?" Eve glanced at Alex, a playful glint in her eye. "I think I might be," she said, crouching down to Mia's level. "What's your name?" Mia beamed, puffing out her chest. "I'm Mia, and I'm 8, Eve nodded seriously. "A very important age. What's in the backpack?" Mia unzipped it and pulled out a worn stuffed elephant. Its ears were frayed, and one of its button eyes was loose. "This is Ellie," she said. "He's my best friend." Eve reached out and gently touched the elephant's ear. "He looks very wise," she said with a straight face. Mia giggled and hugged the elephant tight. "He is," he says. "You have kind eyes." Alex stood back, watching the interaction with a lump in his throat. He had expected this to be an awkward, painful conversation, but Mia, with her innocent charm, had shattered the tension and built a bridge between them in a matter of seconds. Eve stood up, her gaze lingering on Mia before turning back. To Alex, "She's wonderful," he said, his voice thick with pride. "Yeah, she is." Eve didn't say anything more, but the look she gave him was one of deep understanding, a shared recognition of the fierce, all-consuming love of a parent in point. That moment. She wasn't a mystery or a sad journal entry. She was just a woman with kind eyes who understood the most important thing in his world, and that made her the most interesting person he'd ever met. The park was a splash of vibrant autumn color against the gray canvas of the city. Golden leaves crunched under their feet, and the air was crisp with the smell of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Alex pushed Mia on the swings, her laughter a bright melody that cut through the back. Quiet afternoon, Eve sat on the bench beside him, her hands tucked into the pockets of a simple navy peacoat that looked both elegant and comfortable. She watched Mia soar back and forth, a small smile playing on her lips. "She fits here, she," said her voice soft, almost a whisper in the city. "I mean, with the noise and the energy, she's like a little spark." Alex nodded. "She's never known anything else. This is her whole world." They sat in a comfortable silence for a while. Only sound, the rhythmic creak of the swing set, and Mia's occasional shriek of delight. It was a simple moment, uncomplicated and real, and Alex found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't. In years he wasn't thinking about bills or deadlines. He was just here, present in the warmth of a fall afternoon, with two people who were quickly becoming his favorite company. "What about you, Eve?" he asked, turning to look at her. "Did you grow up in a place like this?" She shook her head, her gaze distant. "Not at all. My childhood was quiet, polished, structured, lots of big empty rooms, and not a lot of laughter. Sounds lonely it was," she admitted, her voice dropping slightly. "I used to spend hours in the library just to be in a place that felt full of life." She turned to him, a flicker of the sadness he'd read in her journal surfacing in her eyes. "I learned early on that being surrounded by people and being connected to them are two very different things." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded in understanding. He knew what it was like to feel alone in a crowded room. He had felt it every day for a year after his wife died. But Eve's loneliness felt different, deeper, more ingrained in the fabric of who she was. Mia suddenly jumped off the swing and ran over to them, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright with excitement. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked, her gaze bouncing between Alex and Eve. Alex hesitated. Ice cream wasn't in the budget, but before he could gently say no, Eve spoke up. "I know a place," she said, "a real old-fashioned parlor with the best chocolate fudge in the city. My treat." Mia's face lit up like a firework. Alex opened his mouth to protest, to insist he could pay, but Eve gave him a look, a quiet plea that said, "Let me do this. It's not for you, it's for her." He closed his mouth and gave a slow nod. "All right," he said, "but I'm getting sprinkles." And in that small shared moment of surrender, he felt another wall inside him begin to crumble. The ice cream parlor was a relic, a time capsule of checkered floors, red vinyl booths, and the sweet sticky scent of sugar and cream. It was tucked away on a side street, a place you'd never find unless you knew it. Was there? Eve led them to a booth in the back, her movements confident and familiar like she'd spent a lot of time here. Mia slid in beside her, chattering excitedly about the dozens of flavors listed on the big chalkboard behind the bar counter. Alex sat across from them, content to just watch and listen. He was starting to see the pieces of Eve come together, the quiet shopkeeper, the lonely journal writer, the woman who knew the city's hidden gems. She was a puzzle, and he was finding that he enjoyed the slow process of putting her together. She ordered a single scoop of pistachio in a cup. He ordered a double scoop of Rocky Road in a cone. And Mia, after much deliberation, chose a towering concoction of strawberry bubblegum and rainbow sherbet that was a crime against dairy as they ate. Eve told them stories about the parlor, how she used to come here with her grandfather when she was a little girl, how he'd always let her have 2 scoops. Even if it was right before dinner, her voice was warm with nostalgia. And for a moment, Alex saw a glimpse of the little girl. She must have been a girl who found solace in books and quiet corners and the sweet, simple joy of an ice cream cone with the one person who made her feel seen. "You miss him?" she asked gently. Her grandfather Eve nodded her gaze, dropping to the table every day. He was the only one who didn't care about the family name or the business. He just cared about me. She looked up at Alex, a flicker of something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. "He taught me that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all." Alex didn't say anything. He just reached across the table and gently touched her hand. It was a small gesture, a fleeting moment of connection, but it was enough. It was a silent promise that he understood, that he saw her, not the mystery, not the puzzle, but the person sitting across from him in a red vinyl booth, sharing a memory that tasted like chocolate fudge and quiet grace. The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow turning of a page, a series of quiet moments that stitched themselves into a new kind of normal. Eve became a regular presence in their lives. She'd stop by the apartment with a bag of fresh pastries from a bakery she knew, or a new book for Mia. She'd sit with Alex at the dining table while he worked, offering quiet encouragement and a fresh cup of coffee. When he hit a creative wall, he learned to read the nuances of her moods, the quiet sadness that sometimes flickered in her eyes, the genuine laughter that burst out when Mia said something particularly absurd, and the deep sense of peace that seemed to settle over her when she was in their small, chaotic world. One Saturday afternoon, they found themselves back at her shop. Alex was helping her fix a faulty connection on an old record player, while Mia sat in the corner drawing a detailed map of a fantasy kingdom. Eve had described to her the air was filled with the smell of soldering flux and the soft sound of a vintage jazz record spinning on the quarter-snipe player's turntable. "You're good at this," she said, watching his hands move with practiced ease. "You have a gentle touch for someone who works with such precise things," he shrugged. "I've learned that sometimes you have to be patient and let things tell to you what's wrong." Instead of forcing a solution, she tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Is that a metaphor for life, Mr. Alex?" He grinned. "Maybe a little." She laughed, and the sound was warm and easy, a sound he was quickly growing to love. Later that day, as they were closing up the shop, Eve paused at the door, her hand resting on the lock. She turned to him, her expression serious. "I need to tell you something, Alex," she said, her voice low. Alex's heart gave a slight lurch. He had a feeling he knew what was coming. He had intentionally avoided digging deeper into her past, content to let her reveal it on for her own terms. But the mystery still lingered, a quiet question mark at the edge of their budding relationship. "I'm not just a shopkeeper," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "I used to be someone else, someone with a different name, a different life." He nodded slowly. "I know," he said softly. She blinked, surprised. "You know," he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet from it. He slid a folded newspaper clipping. It was old, yellowed at the edges, a photo from a business journal he'd found online weeks ago, but had never mentioned a picture of a young woman with the same piercing blue eyes and a confident smile standing on a stage accepting an award. The caption underneath, "Reed Evelyn Reed, CEO of Reed. Innovations named Tech Visionary of the Year." He had known for a while. Not everything, but enough. He'd seen the way she carried herself, the quiet intelligence that belied her simple life. He'd pieced together the clues from the bland journal, the initials, ER. The mentions of boardrooms and empty success. It all made a terrible kind of sense. He had just been waiting for her to be the one to tell him. "Her name is Evelyn," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded. "Evelyn?" He said the name, feeling strange and foreign on his tongue. "I figured it was something like that." He looked at her not with anger or accusation, but with a deep and quiet understanding. "I don't care about that name, Eve. I care about the person who sits with my daughter and teaches her how to make paper cranes. I care about the person who brings me coffee when I'm on a deadline and who listens to me talk about my fears without judgment. That's the person I'm getting to know, and that's the person I'm starting to fall for." A tear slipped down her cheek. A single silent drop that traced a path through the dust on her skin. She didn't wipe it away. She just stood there, letting him see all of it. The fear, the relief, the raw vulnerability of being truly seen for the first time. "In a very long time, thank you," she whispered the words, thick with emotion. "Thank you for waiting." The revelation of her name settled between them. Not like a bomb, but like a quiet surrender. The walls she had so carefully built around herself had finally come down, and what was left was something raw and real and infinitely more beautiful. Alex didn't press for details. He didn't ask about Reed Innovations or the Reed Innovations billions that her name was attached to. He understood that she had come here to escape that world, not to bring it with her, but the knowledge of it. Change the dynamic. In subtle ways he found himself watching her with a new sense of wonder and a quiet ache of sympathy. He understood now the source of her loneliness, the crushing weight of a legacy she never asked for, and the courage it must have taken for her to walk away from it all. Evelyn, for her part, seemed to shed a weight she'd been carrying for months. She smiled more freely, laughed more easily. Her movements in the shop became less guarded, more relaxed. She was no longer just hiding. She was healing one afternoon as they were walking through a local farmer's market. The scent of fresh bread and ripe apples hanging in the air. A man in a business suit stopped short in front of them. His eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Reed," he stammered, his voice a mix of shock and awe. "I thought you'd disappeared." Evelyn tensed for a moment, her hand instinctively reaching for Alex's, but then she took a breath and gave the man a polite but firm smile. "I'm just Eve now," she said, her voice clear and steady. The man looked confused but nodded, and hurried away. Evelyn turned to Alex, her heart pounding but her eyes were clear. "I'm not ashamed of who I was," she said, "but I'm not going back to being her." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know," he said, "and I'm not asking you to," they continued. Their walk, the encounter, a small ripple in the calm waters of their new life. But it was a reminder that the past was never truly gone. It just learned to live alongside the present. Later that night, after Mia was asleep, they sat on the fire escape of Alex's apartment, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. "I sold everything," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper against the city's hum. "The company, the stocks, the properties, it's all in a trust. Now, funding a foundation. I started to support small independent artists and creators, people like you." Alex looked at her, stunned. "You did all that?" She nodded. "It's not about charity," she said, "it's about legacy. My grandfather taught me that real wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you build for others." I'm just finally listening to him. He looked at her, the woman who had walked away from an empire to find herself in a dusty little shop, and felt a surge of admiration so profound it left him breathless. He didn't know what the future held for them. He didn't know if their two worlds could ever truly merge, but in that moment, under the vast and endless sky, he knew one thing for sure. He was in love with Evelyn Reed, and he would fight to keep the Eve he had found. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. A splashy headline on a major financial news website: Reed heiress surfaces as humble shopkeeper in quiet urban enclave. The article was accompanied by a grainy paparazzi photo of Evelyn and Alex walking out of the ice cream parlor, their faces caught in a moment of laughter and ease. It was an invasion, a stark and brutal reminder that her old world was always watching, always waiting to pull her back in the grotto. Phone at the shop started ringing off the hook. Reporters, bloggers, old business associates who hadn't spoken to her in years. They all wanted a piece of the story. The narrative was already being spun. The lonely billionaire find solace in a simple life. The blue-collar hero who had won her heart. It was a fairy tale, a lie, a gross oversimplification of the fragile, beautiful thing they had been building. Alex felt a cold knot of anger form in his stomach. He saw the way the color drained from Evelyn's face as she read the article, the way her hands trembled as she silenced her phone. He wanted to protect her, to build a wall around their small world and keep the vultures at bay, but he knew he couldn't. This was her battle, a ghost from a past. He had no power. Over that afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the shop. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his face grim and determined. Alex recognized him from the photos in the business articles. Arthur Vance, Evelyn's former COO, and the man who had tried to take over the company after she left. He walked into the shop without even a glance at Alex, his eyes fixed solely on Evelyn. "Evelyn," he said, his voice sharp and demanding, "we need to talk. This circus is damaging the brand. The stockholders are in a panic. You need to come back and do damage control." "I'm not coming back," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "This is my life now." Vance scoffed this. A dusty little shop, and he gestured toward Alex with a dismissive wave. "This is a phase, a romantic fantasy. You need to wake up and remember who you are." "I know exactly who I am," she replied, "and I'm not the person you can control anymore." She turned to Alex, her eyes pleading with him to understand, to trust her. And in that moment, he made a choice. He stepped forward and stood beside her, his presence a quiet statement of solidarity. Vance looked at him with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. "And what are you in all this? Her pet project? Her charity case?" Alex met his gaze, his voice calm and steady. "I'm the man who loves her, and you need to leave." Vance stared at them for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the shop, slamming the door behind him. The bell chirped mockingly in the silence that followed. Evelyn let out a shaky breath and leaned against the counter, her knees weak with relief. Alex wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "This isn't over, is it?" she whispered into his chest. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble, "but we'll face it together." The media frenzy was relentless. Reporters camped outside the shop and Alex's apartment, their cameras and microphones, a constant violation of the quiet life they had cherished. Their faces were plastered across every gossip site, their story twisted into a sensationalized romance that bore little resemblance to the truth. Alex tried to shield Mia from the worst of it, but she was a smart kid. She saw the cameras, she heard the whispers, she knew something was wrong. One evening, as he was tucking her into bed, she looked up at him with her wide, serious eyes. "Are they going to make Eve leave?" she asked, her voice small and fragile. Alex's heart ached. "No, baby," he said, stroking her hair, "no one is going to make her leave." But he wasn't so sure. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Evelyn's old board was threatening legal action, claiming her erratic behavior was damaging the company's reputation. They were trying to freeze her assets to force her back into the fold. She spent her days on the phone with lawyers, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Alex watched her, the weight of her old world settling back onto her shoulders, and he felt a growing sense of powerlessness. He was a good man, a loving father, but he couldn't fight this battle for her. He couldn't protect her from the ghosts of her own past. One night, as they sat in the quiet of the shop long after they'd closed for the day, Evelyn turned to him, her eyes filled with a deep and weary sadness. "Maybe they're right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I'm just bringing chaos into your life. Into Mia's life. Maybe I should just go." Alex took her hands in his grip, firm and steady. "Don't you dare say that," he said, his voice fierce. "We are not going to let them win. We are not going to let them tear us apart." He looked around the small, dusty shop, at the broken things they had fixed together, at the quiet sanctuary they had built for themselves. "This is real, Eve," he said. "This is our life, and we are going to fight for it." She looked at him, her eyes welling with tears, and for the first time in weeks she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could weather this storm together. The idea came to Evelyn in the middle of the night, a quiet spark of defiance in the darkness. She was tired of fighting, tired of being on the defensive. She realized that the only way to win this battle was to change the narrative, to take control of her own story, and use her power for something good. The next morning she called a press conference. The media went into a frenzy speculating about what she would announce: a return to the company, a new tech venture, a messy breakup with her blue-collar lover. They all expected drama. What they got was something else entirely. She stood at the podium, not in a power suit, but in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her face free of makeup. She looked calm, confident, serene. She didn't read from a prepared statement. She spoke from the heart. She told them about her loneliness, her disillusionment, her search for something real. She told them about a dusty little shop and a man with kind eyes who had taught her the value of a life built on love, not legacy. And then she dropped the bombshell. She announced that she was officially dissolving her ties with Reed Innovations and using her entire personal fortune to launch a new foundation, the Second Wind Foundation, dedicated to providing grants and resources to small businesses, independent artists, and community projects, people like Alex, who were the quiet heroes of the pampless world. The ones who fixed what was broken and asked for nothing in return. The room was silent for a moment. The reporters stunned into submission. Then a flurry of questions erupted, but Evelyn just smiled and walked away from the podium. She had said all she needed to say. Alex and Mia watched the press conference on the small TV in their living room. Mia cheered when Evelyn mentioned the foundation, her eyes shining with pride. Alex just stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across his face. He wasn't just proud, he was in awe. She hadn't just fought back. She had changed the game. She had taken the ugliest parts of her past and turned them into a force for good. Later that day, she walked into the shop, her face tired but radiant. Alex met her at the door and pulled her into a hug, so tight it left her breathless. "You were incredible," he whispered into her hair. She smiled against his chest. "I just told the truth." He pulled back and looked at her, his eyes filled with a love so deep it took her breath away. "I know," he said, "and that's why I love you." The storm had passed. The media had moved on to the next shiny object, and a quiet peace had settled back over their lives. The shop was busier than ever, not with reporters, but with customers. People who had been inspired by their story, who wanted to support the small, dusty place where something so real had taken root. Alex and Evelyn worked side by side, their days filled with the comfortable rhythm of shared tasks and easy laughter. Mia was their constant shadow, her bright energy, a reminder of what they were fighting for. One sunny afternoon, as they were closing up the shop, Evelyn turned to Alex, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I have an idea," she said. He raised an eyebrow, wary of her grand pronouncements. "What if we expanded?" she said. What if we turned this place into more than just a repair shop? What if we made it a community hub? Place where people could learn to fix their own things, a makerspace, a place for second chances. He looked at her, a slow grin spreading across his face. You mean, like a foundation? But with more soldering irons? Exactly, she said, her eyes shining. He pulled her close, his heart full to bursting. You know, he said, his voice a low rumble. I think that's the best idea you've ever had. They stood there in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the quiet hum of forgotten things and the promise of a future. They would build together, a future that was messy and imperfect and more beautiful than anything they could have ever imagined. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was a beginning, a real one, earned and chosen and built on the foundation of a used laptop and a love that had given them both a second wind.